everybody. My name is Michael, and welcome back to Last to First. Midweek podcast time before we get into the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this weekend, and we had some big breaking news over the past couple days here, and that is finally the worst kept secret of recent times. Adrian Newey is finally officially moving to Aston Martin. Wow, this season continues to just bring storylines upon storylines, good races after good races. And yes, it is just only continuing to bring more and more drama and interesting things with the sport here. So yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. It's quite the significant signing, certainly, on Aston Martin's behalf, and it's quite the significant role that Adrian Newey is going to be having. He's going to be on a multi-year contract as a managing technical partner, and he's a shareholder as well. So he really has some skin in the game. He more so than he did at Red Bull. I think maybe that's something that he always wanted there, but he wasn't able to achieve there, unfortunately. But now he's going to be fully invested. He'll be directly reporting to Lawrence Stroll, and he'll be ahead on the totem pole of a lot of the other big signings of recent times. So he's going to be really involved in not only helping with some of the technical decisions and helping to create some of the ideas for the team, but also just figuring out the structure and the best way to implement everything going forward and just ensure that Aston Martin is performing to the best of its ability. It's also really interesting how even though Adrian Newey is in the twilight of his career, he seems to be going full in and recommitting his 100% attention. He mentioned that at least for the first few years, which is a really important note, that he's going to be all in 24/7, really hands-on with everything. I think that's definitely a scary proposition to have him full hands-on with everything for a few years. But I'm sure as he continues to lay the groundwork for everything, then he'll start to take less and less of a role, but still remain kind of overarching and probably work on some side projects like he did with Red Bull and just continue to be a shareholder and really make some important decisions for the team going forward. But this really shows quite the amount of faith that Newey has in the Aston Martin vision. I don't know what Lawrence Stroll did to show him exactly what he needed. I'm sure the $30 million a year certainly helped, as well as all of the new facilities and everything like that. But yeah, Lawrence Stroll seems to be proving to Adrian Newey and everybody that they mean business, and they are really motivated and ambitious to make the team an excellent team going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, this team has already been gaining in potential. It just continues to sign big names previously, like Enrico Cardile and Dan Fellows, who was underneath Adrian Newey previously in Red Bull, interestingly enough. But yeah, I mean, they have so much star power in that team. It's kind of crazy. On paper, it could be one of the best teams, and I can imagine it fighting towards the sharp end of the grid in the next few years with the way that they're going. My only question marks are, will it be too much star power? Will there be too many big voices, big faces in the sport that their egos will be getting involved, and it's all, not going to mesh super well? It'll be interesting to see how that goes, and if Newey can create a culture there where everybody is going to feel like they're able to contribute and feel like they're not getting overshadowed by anything. That's going to be a really key thing going forward. Will some of the other folks really buy into Newey's plan and really go forward with it? People like Enrico Cardile was signed on and hasn't even started yet, long before this Newey news was announced, of course. So how will his role change? How will other people's role change? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of changes in the technical department and just the overall structure, more so than maybe personnel changes. But I think that's going to be the biggest storyline, on top of course, the performance of the team. But will it all mesh? Will it go from greatness on paper to greatness on track? Only time will tell. Now, I also wanted to touch on Kimi Antonelli's crash in FP1 at Monza, because I didn't really talk too much about it, and just kind of talk about, was it too much? Was it too much too soon for the youngster? I know he's confirmed for the Mercedes seat next year, so it's going to be a lot of pressure for him. But was it just laid on too much for him? I don't necessarily think it was too much too soon for him. I think if he is the superstar in the making, like Max Verstappen, then he's gonna be able to swim. He's not gonna sink. I think if you're that good, then he's gonna rise with the tide and rise to the occasion. So I don't think it was necessarily too soon, but I still don't think a mistake was acceptable. I mean, the second push lap of the FP1, that was really terrible, and he was just pushing too much, just way too much. He just went way too deep on the brakes, and just with a green track, not really having a lot of experience with the tires, and just overall in the F1 car, I think it was a big mistake, and it really affected George Russell's weekend as well. And that's just not something that can be happening. I know there's definitely a risk with a rookie crashing and everything like that, but that's something that he really should have contained. Yes, the pace is great and everything, but that's not a good way to start things, and it's going to be really important the next time that he's in an F1 car in the public like that to make sure that he does a good job and make sure it doesn't become a standard thing, because if he crashes again in the next one, the pressure is only going to build, and it's going to be hard to get out of that rut. Now, how does this crash affect the hype that was building up? That's something that I've been seeing around, and I don't think it really does affect any of the hype. For me, I do feel like I have a sour taste in my mouth after all of that. While it was impressive, the pace that he was showing immediately, I just think you cannot have a mistake like that. But overall, I mean, that's not going to affect Mercedes' decision to sign him. That was signed before before the crash, of course, and before the Monza weekend actually happened and everything. So that was in the cards before. But overall, I think people are still going to be hyping him up, still really excited. Regardless if he had that crash or not, he still has that underlying, seemingly really strong, potential great pace. And he just needs to get some experience and start building upon it. He really just needs to make sure that the crashing doesn't become a bit of a habit. So overall, I'm still definitely excited to see Antonelli in the car next year. I think of the options that were available, that totally makes sense. Sainz would have been a safe pair of hands as well, but you got to go with youth. You got to go with the person in your driver academy and the person that you believe is the future. What's going to be extremely interesting in the future, though, is to see him versus George Russell. And more so than just the outcome of that, it's going to be interesting if Max Verstappen does indeed want to go to Mercedes, who is going to get ousted, because somebody is definitely going to get ousted if Verstappen actually is available and Toto Wolff still wants him. I don't know what it would take for them to hold on to Russell and Antonelli over Verstappen if he was available. I think they would both have to be performing at a ridiculously high level. But yeah, I think it would come down to whoever was performing best would get to keep the seat alongside Verstappen. So a little longer term thing to think about, but I do think the two of them will be really battling it out for supremacy. So with Kevin Magnussen's race ban after accumulating 12 penalty points, Haas confirmed that Ollie Behrman will be in the car for the Azerbaijan weekend. He will be foregoing the F2 race for the weekend so that he can compete with Haas, who of course he will be full-time driving for it next year. So something that I've kind of talked about a couple times and something that I'm not seeing much of, and maybe I'm crazy for thinking it, or maybe it's just outright not a possibility, so nobody's talking about it, but should Haas just keep him in the car for the rest of the season? I know Magnussen hasn't been performing terrible, but he's not been having the best season. He's getting completely destroyed by Hülkenberg. Would it be beneficial to just throw Behrman in for the rest of the season? Maybe it'd be too expensive for them to get rid of Magnussen. Maybe just morally they don't want to do that, but I don't know. I think might as well. If he's your guy going forward for at least the next year, get him a few low pressure races to end out the season, and that way he'll really hit the ground running going forward in 2025. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's a question to ask anyways. Now, another thing that I thought of a question that I had in my mind about Behrman completely foregoing the F2 weekend and going for the F1 seat and for the weekend is how does all of this affect the way that F2 looks, particularly both with Behrman and Antonelli. Both of them are not performing super well. At least the teams aren't in F2, and they already have F1 seats lined up. Now, of course, Formula One is the end goal, so obviously he should definitely take the opportunity to hop in a Haas for the weekend and forgo F2, but I think it just shows how not so important F2 is right now. The last year's Felipe Drugovich, the F2 champion, as well as likely this year's champion, are not going to get F1 seats. So it's kind of a cruel world with that, but it's interesting to see how F2 is seemingly becoming less and less important in regards to getting an F1 seat. Need the money, need the connections, need the speed, and it's not always just about results in the world of Formula One. Touching on Alpine, I was thinking, what impact will the latest strikes at Viry have on the future of the Renault engine program? Is that really going to make any difference for Alpine keeping the engine program going, for Renault keeping the engine program going? I don't see how it really will, to be honest with you. Alpine and Renault, I think, have clearly shown in the past that they don't care about optics. If they did care about optics and how things look, they wouldn't have hired Briatore, and they wouldn't have PR disaster after PR disaster after PR disaster. So I honestly don't think that the strike is going to do much of anything. They're not concerned with how it looks to the public. They're only concerned about sucking that team dry and getting whatever they can out of it. And yeah, I think it's a foregone conclusion that they're going to have the Mercedes engine in the car, and then it's going to get sold in the next few years. I mean, why is Alpine acting like they aren't for sale, but everything they're doing is suggesting that they are for sale? It's such a weird dynamic they have going on. I don't think nobody understands the minds of Renault Group or Alpine or any of the executives there. It's kind of shocking, of course, but I know they don't want to appear for sale because that will show that maybe they're a little more desperate and won't be able to get as good of a deal, but it certainly looks like they are preparing for a sale. So let's look ahead to preview the Azerbaijan Grand Prix coming up this weekend. I think it should be another interesting race. Some great storylines going into it. The McLaren duo having quite the interesting little battle last time out. Ferrari seeming to be back on pace a little bit, plus this track has always done well for them. And then Red Bull really struggling right now. So looking ahead at this weekend, my first question is, can Ferrari and Leclerc make it 2 in a row? I think it's definitely very possible. I mean, Leclerc has, I think it was the last 3 years, pole positions he's been on for the past 3 years in a row, which is kind of crazy. He hasn't won every one of those, of course, with his record of pole positions to wins, but I think it's definitely possible. I mean, even though they did win last time out at Monza, so they did have pretty decent pace, but I think outright the McLaren is still faster. So I think it will be tricky for Leclerc to win again, just with McLaren being a little faster. But hey, all it takes is a little bit of a slip up from McLaren, or maybe Ferrari is just a little bit better this weekend. It is so close amongst the top 4 that it is certainly possible. I really wouldn't be at all surprised to see Leclerc on pole at the very least. Just will he be able to convert that into a win? I'm not so sure about. Now my next question, I'm a little surprised that I'm even considering this, but should McLaren be more worried about Ferrari in the constructors than Red Bull? I think it's a really valid question to be had. Red Bull does not seem anywhere close to figuring out their problems right now, and they're currently really on the back foot. It looks like a foregone conclusion that Red Bull is going to lose out on the Constructors' Championship. But with the resurgence of Ferrari, with a few good, at least previously good tracks for them coming up, I think it's definitely possible that if Ferrari get their act together, they could be knocking on the doors of McLaren. With them being so close, if they're yo-yoing a little bit back and forth, next thing you know, they're the ones battling it out. I could definitely see a world very soon where Ferrari surpasses Red Bull in the constructors as well, and somehow Red Bull dropped down to third. It's a little ways off still, but it's definitely really possible, and that would be quite the turn of events for the season. But I think that's going to be something we should look to going forward, and it really might be a Ferrari and McLaren battle for the constructors going forward. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on Perez because I feel like he hasn't been in the spotlight as much recently because of just Red Bull's overall downturn and just a lot of stuff going on with Adrian Newey and everything like that. But my question is Red Bull's significant downturn helping Perez retain a seat for the remainder of the season? And I think it's definitely possible because even Max Verstappen is struggling. The two of them were pretty closely matched at Monza, and I think that'll definitely help Perez in his quest to at least go for the rest of the season. What that'll look like next year, probably not looking so good, but right now I think Red Bull is less focused on dropping Perez for the remainder of the season and really just focused on trying to figure out their car, because all of a sudden it just seems like they don't understand it and they just cannot get the right balance out of it. So that's probably their real focus, but it could be different, or it could still be the case that they're going to reevaluate him in a couple of races time and he could get replaced at the end of the season. All right, so that's my midweek podcast prior to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So thank you all for tuning in. Give me a follow on social media. I'm on X as Last2First Real. Of course, first spelling F1rst, and on Instagram as Last2First. You can find me, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. And I also started a blog, so it'd be awesome if you wanted to check that out as well. It's Last2First, of course, F1rst.wordpress.com. So thanks again for tuning in, and let's get ramped up for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.